Well, hello everyone. My name is Dr. Alex Egan and I am a Senior Lecturer in the School of Law here at the Queensland University of Technology. I'm also the Coordinator of the QUT Global Law, Science and Technology Seminar Series, which brings together national and international speakers who explore the personal, societal and governance dimensions of solving real-world problems, which are influenced by and through the interaction of science, technology and the law. I'd like to officially welcome you all to today's seminar. It's so pleasing to see participants from both the profession and universities from all around the world. In this seminar of our series, we're going to be hearing from Professor Peter Dauvergne, who is a Professor of International Relations in the Department of Political Science at the University of British Columbia. He has an extensive publication record of many books, which you can find on his profile. And today, Professor Dauvergne will be presenting to us on his new book, AI in the Wild, Sustainability in the Age of Artificial Intelligence, which is to be published by MIT Press this year. You can find an abstract for this seminar in the information for this event. So the format for the seminar will be as follows. Professor Dauvergne will speak for about 35 to 40 minutes using a PowerPoint presentation. And then that will be followed by a structured question and answer session, which I'll chair. So for the Q&A session, if you wish to ask a question, you have a few options. You can select the participant bar at the bottom of your Zoom screen and select yes or a green tick in the participant window, or select the button to raise your hand, and that way I'll know you're ready to ask a question. Alternatively, you can post in the chat and send me a message containing a question, and then I can ask the question on your behalf. So you can ask the questions through your microphone as I call on you, or I'll ask the question on your behalf, then Professor Dauvergne will respond, and so on and so forth as we cycle through the questions. Of course, as usual for this seminar, I request you adhere to the usual Zoom meeting etiquette by keeping yourself muted, except where you may be called upon to ask a question during the Q&A. So thank you very much for being here today, and I'll turn it over to Professor Dauvergne.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Alex. I really appreciate that kind introduction. And I'd also like to extend a big thank you to Professor Afshan Akhtar Kavari, who very kindly extended this invitation for me to visit QUT. As he knows, I was intending to visit you all in person and had this wonderful plan to tour Australia and have a chance to see Queensland and QUT in person. But this is hopefully, close to the second best we can do. So it's a real pleasure for me today to have the chance to talk to you about my latest book, AI in the Wild. And those of you who've been following the publication of this book will know it just came out last week. So I'm very excited by the publication and also by the cover. So one of the things that I've found particularly pleasurable this time in the publication process is I managed to convince MIT Press to have AI actually design and create that cover. So the image that you see on that screen is an AI generated digital art, which is AI's interpretation of the phrase between heaven and earth. And I chose that because I thought it was actually quite a remarkable image to try and capture that idea between heaven and earth, and the bright colors and the yellow and the sense that it's actually quite wild, I thought kind of was a perfect way to express some of the ideas in this book. And I also think the cover kind of gets at what I'm trying to bring out in this book, which is both some of the wonders and the creativity of artificial intelligence, but also some of the wildness that happens when this technology moves into the international sphere. I'm a political scientist, I teach international relations, and so one of the things I was very interested in exploring is what happens when this technology moves beyond its creators and it starts to become a political force, and it starts to become an economic force and then a social force, and try and understand critically what this might mean for the world as a whole. So today what I'm going to do is just try and give you a quick snapshot of this book. I'm going to break it down into 5 parts. I'm going to talk to you very quickly about the overarching arguments. Then I'm going to talk to you about the theoretical framing that I use to do my analysis, what I call the political economy of artificial intelligence. Then I'm going to talk about 2 different sides of the same coin: the prospects that I see for this technology for promoting sustainability, and the limits and dangers that I see from this technology. And then I'll end with some broad conclusions and hopefully debate and discussion. I'm still learning about this technology. It's extraordinarily dynamic, and probably while I just did those introductory remarks, another application was found for artificial intelligence. So it's moving very quickly, and so there's lots that we can kind of engage with. The way I've always imagined this particular book is that I'm trying my very best to be an international relations scholar and look at this technology from a bird's eye view, try and see the biggest picture possible. So you can see the image on the screen. The particular bird that I've imagined for this book is a seagull, because what I've kind of tried to do is sweep down and explore and look at particular technologies, assess them, see what some of the benefits are, but also some of the dangers, and then occasionally, you know, see if it's garbage, right? And for those of you familiar with the computer science expression, garbage in, garbage out, I've tried to become a seagull that searches for that garbage in, garbage out. So that's kind of the approach that I've taken for this particular book. So let me begin with the overarching arguments of this book. The biggest, most straightforward argument that I make in this book is that I see artificial intelligence as an extraordinarily powerful technology, a technology in my mind equivalent to electricity in the 1900s in terms of its potential to transform global relations. And for specifically the politics of global sustainability, I see this as a technology that, as with so many different technologies, bringing both a lot of good and a lot of risk and a lot of actual dangers, as I'm going to talk about as I go forward. So the first is kind of, you know, I want to see, you know, this fairly and in a balanced way. The second kind of big overarching argument is that I make the point that a lot of what I see as analysis and assessment of artificial intelligence so far has taken what I feel is a fairly apolitical interpretation, that a lot of it has kind of understood this technology either in isolation or as simply something that's clever and extraordinary, and a lot of media coverage has been kind of assessing it as something that is you know, a cool new technology, and so they kind of splash it on a lot of media sites as that. But what I do is I try and look at this more as a tool of power. I see artificial intelligence as actually an instrument of politics itself, and understanding it as a tool of power and as a way of actually gaining more power, you get a very different kind of analysis, a much more critical analysis. And so a lot of this book is actually kind of challenging some of the what you might think of as the media presentation and the corporate presentation of artificial intelligence, much of which I see is very kind of glossy and one-sided in terms of its benefits. A third kind of big overarching argument is that I contest this idea that artificial intelligence, without strong governance and without legal regulation, is going to somehow launch some kind of sustainability revolution. Very famously, Al Gore made that comment in one of his public speeches, where he said, looking at, you know, all the incredible ways artificial intelligence is advancing sustainability, it feels like we're heading towards a sustainability revolution. I would say that actually is a misrepresentation of artificial intelligence, and that it is definitely able to do good. It's definitely able to help in many different circumstances, but it's actually a big exaggeration to say that this somehow on its own is going to bring about global sustainability. And for me, a big part of this book is about poking into what I see as the limits of artificial intelligence and what I see as the big dangers of artificial intelligence. The kind of the takeaway message of this book is that there's lots of promise to this technology. I personally find I'm very attracted to the technology and can often marvel at what computer scientists and engineers are currently pulling off. But kind of the big message of the book is we need, if we genuinely understand sustainability as social, environmental, and economic, that we need caution, we need humility, and we need to watch out for risk. And we need to think every time we see somebody saying this is going to be a great breakthrough for sustainability, this new AI application, we need to think caution, caution, caution. So that's kind of the big takeaway message. So let me now turn to what I see as the political economy of artificial intelligence. The first is that when I talk about artificial intelligence, I'm not talking about what a lot of science fiction writers are talking about, some kind of emergence of human level artificial intelligence or some kind of artificial general intelligence, that we're going to have around the corner anytime soon a computer that has the intelligence of even an average human. That's not the power for me of artificial intelligence. That may well come. It may be 30 years, 50 years in the future. That wouldn't surprise me if 50 years we do have that form of artificial intelligence. But the artificial intelligence that this book analyzes and that I see as kind of the real challenge for the world right now is this diffuse use of this technology, narrow applications of this technology through all other technologies and all other economic processes we're seeing around the world. It's a technology that is accelerating other technologies. It's a technology that's ramping up, sometimes improving, but sometimes just accelerating the power of other technologies. And you can see this in a whole range of things, right? The most obvious one is the ability of artificial intelligence to play games better, right? Japanese chess, shogi, Go, the Chinese game, or the Western game of chess. And in fact, myself, one of the reasons I ended up getting so intrigued and wanting to write a book on artificial intelligence was my own kind of awe at the ways that the latest deep learning neural network artificial intelligence has improved chess engines around the world. In particular, DeepMind, which the company Google or Alphabet has acquired, it came up with this program called AlphaZero, and it just revolutionized the way chess engines are now playing the game. And what was really kind of stunning to me, and I think to a lot of the world, is this particular chess engine was only given the rules of the game, and it was programmed to play itself. And it played itself tens of millions of games, and using that data, it taught itself how to play chess. And the programmers intentionally didn't give it any human knowledge, the hundreds and hundreds of years that humans have been studying this game and devoting themselves to writing libraries filled with books about this game. They just left all of that out. And in fact, they said it was going to be more powerful as a result of what it did. And what for me, as somebody who, well, long ago dreamed of being a professional chess player, I have to admit, that's one of the reasons I got excited about this. But one of the things is I've always found kind of chess computers kind of tedious and boring, because all they're really able to do is show that humans make lots of mistakes, and it would show that there are tactical errors. But AlphaZero is completely different. It's creative, it's aggressive, and for the first time, just by teaching itself and not relying on human knowledge, it is finding new discoveries, and it's teaching the best players in the world now new ways of strategically thinking. And so you think, wow, that's just one micro example, right? This is also true now of Go. This is true of other games, but it's also true across the whole world economy. And that's what I see as the true reason that artificial intelligence is something that anyone who cares about global sustainability has to really think hard about has to pay attention to, right? And just a few examples, right? We see artificial intelligence in recommendation engines for everything from the movies we watch to the products we buy. It's dramatically improved, particularly the deep learning neural network artificial intelligence, the AI that learns from big data. It's improved translation. It's able to converse, not always super well, but it's able to now converse as chatbots. But it's also doing many other things, right? Identifying faces. The facial recognition technology advances of the last couple of years have been really quite dramatic. Trading stocks. Gosh, they're even writing novels, writing sports reports. There'll be a bunch of AI programs who do a quick analysis of tonight's presidential debate between Joe Biden and President Donald Trump. And by the way, those of you who've decided to skip that debate and instead listen to me, thank you very much. That's very kind of all of you. I feel that when I can, best Joe Biden and Donald Trump, that's a pretty good. Now that I've told you all that the debate's starting in about 40 minutes, you may all leave, but hopefully not. But the point is, we've got AI out there now summarizing events like that and writing and writing news stories, but also, as we're going to talk about a little bit later, they might also be writing disinformation as well. They might be writing disinformation about that debate tonight, who knows. But again, there's also many other applications of artificial intelligence, from mopping floors at Walmart to, of course, flying drones, to the one that many of you will be very familiar with, right? The self-driving car is around the corner now, and we've made incredible strides in the past couple of years on this. And so you see this diffuse technology, kind of like I said, electricity, it's just going into all the other engineering feats that the world has pulled off and changing those. And that's a big deal for global sustainability. And that's kind of what motivated me to write this book. To put it a little bit differently, just to give one statistic, PricewaterhouseCoopers estimates that this diffuse narrow applications of artificial intelligence is going to add about $16 trillion to the world economy in about 10 years from now, by 2030. And that's just a stunning amount of money, right? Just to compare it to the GDPs of a few countries in 2017. That's the GDP of Japan plus Germany plus India plus Brazil plus the United Kingdom, right? And we're adding that to the world economy. So you can see, right, this is just a fiercely valuable technology. And one of the reasons I wanted to take a power analysis and understand this from a political economy is when you are seeing that much money on the table, you're seeing that much poker stakes available. You're going to see a lot of big companies going after that money. You're going to see a lot of states competing for that money, but you're also going to see a lot of startup companies that are trying to get into that game. And so you're going to get an energizing effect that can lead to many outcomes that are quite dramatic, right? So you can see that this is worth a lot of money, but in this political economy of artificial intelligence is one of the things that I think is kind of a natural outcome when there's that much money on the table and you're dealing with a new technology, is there's very powerful forces here of hyperbole and exaggeration. And so one of the things we see in the sustainability debate is it's quite common to see a media story, or even sometimes a university, making an announcement that they've had some kind of breakthrough and they're going to soon release a product that's going to have a dramatic, valuable impact for good, right? And that might be for sustainability, right? And sometimes that's true. There's no question about it that that's sometimes true. But there's very powerful political and economic reasons that you might exaggerate, right? If you're a startup looking for venture capital, well, you want to look like you've got a product that everyone's going to want, right? If you're trying to sell it to, let's say, Microsoft or Facebook or Amazon, or if you're in China, right, Tencent or Baidu or Alibaba, then you want to make it sound like you've got something that is extraordinarily powerful. And one of the things is, I think, social media and the way that we're reporting a lot of news right now, you get kind of a fierce dialogue. And that's where I think some of this idea that AI is going to be this kind of breakthrough technology that'll lead to sustainability is coming from. It's coming from actually just kind of a natural exaggeration and hyperbole that we're seeing in this political economy. We also have very powerful risks. We have very powerful interests here that conceal the risks of this technology. Sometimes it's states, but often it's big companies. But again, I would say startups, right? I've been doing a lot of research on these startups, and yes, they're often, you know, very good, bright, young people, many people possibly listening. But again, it makes sense if you're trying to sell your product, if you're trying to get venture capital, that you might end up not necessarily exploring all the possible downsides of a technology, right? At the same time, you have very powerful companies that are concentrating control over this technology. At the higher end, this is a very expensive technology, and it's a technology that, well, it takes the best and the brightest minds to do the breakthrough research. And so if you look at what companies are controlling this technology to the greatest extent, what are acquiring the startups, what are growing ever bigger, you see it's the big tech companies of the world, right? But you also have big states at play here. And sometimes in the sustainability debate, I feel that this gets lost. And you can see there are powerful states here. And you can see President Vladimir Putin's quote here: "Artificial intelligence is the future, not only of Russia, but of all of mankind. Whoever becomes the leader in this sphere will become the ruler of the world," right? So he said that a couple years ago. And one of the things that's going on here is a lot of artificial intelligence research and findings are being published open access. There's actually quite a culture among AI researchers to share information, to share algorithms, but at the same time, there's a lot of research going on that we don't know about inside some of the big companies, particularly in China, but I would also say inside some of the big militaries of the world, particularly the US, China, and Russia. But there's others too, Israel, other middle powers as well. You see this kind of thing at play. So you can see there's a big political economy here. And for me, that's kind of at the heart of this book, that I go in and I kind of reflect on what I see as some of the more exciting and bigger claims that this is going to have a big meaningful impact on sustainability, and I question it and challenge it through this political economy lens. So let me now turn to the kind of good news of the book. Is when I do that, I actually see lots of instances where, yeah, this technology really is doing some very, very innovative and clever things. A few examples to throw out there for people who are in the environmental management side. This is a very powerful technology for improving things like biodiversity mapping, climate modeling. The reason for that is it's particularly the machine learning variant of artificial intelligence is very, very good at discovering trends, correlations that we might otherwise notice in big data. And environmental data is becoming massive. It's almost unmanageable for many researchers, even huge teams of researchers working globally, and to have artificial intelligence be able to go in and digest and analyze and look for correlations, unexpected perhaps trends that might come out of that is actually is very valuable. And so we're seeing improvements in climate modeling and biodiversity mapping and deforestation mapping. We're seeing better prediction on weather. We're seeing better prediction on flooding, droughts, right? So all of that is definitely real, and there's no question that this is useful. We also see this going into platforms like Global Fishing Watch and helping to fight things like illegal fishing in the world. It's very good at kind of predicting the movements of fishing fleets, but also tracking and monitoring in a way that's not possible for big teams of humans. And so it can identify and alert authorities when they have suspicious activity at sea. And so again, another valuable application. When it's put into things like drones, again, we've got lots of examples around the world where this is useful for spotting poaching or perhaps seeing illegal loggers. And then alerting authorities to this occurring. Just one example from your own university. Some of you, or at least the university I'm presenting at, Queensland University of Technology. One of the ones that I have been personally very impressed by is what they call RangerBot. And RangerBot is a semi-autonomous AI-powered submersible that is swimming the Great Barrier Reef, and it is injecting crown of thorns starfish with bile salts and eliminating those crown of thorns starfish. And this has become very adept, much better than human divers are able to do in terms of spotting accuracy, but also just the ability to handle the strong currents, the ability to work long periods of time. And this is really definitely a significant and very interesting technological breakthrough. And if you're wondering why you would want to get rid of these crown of thorns starfish, these are native to the Great Barrier Reef. Many of you will probably know that, but we would normally only see small outbreaks of these starfish. And they are there in part because this helps to keep diversity in the reef itself. But if we get major outbreaks and we get a proliferation of these, which has been happening regularly on the Great Barrier Reef, partly because of agricultural runoff, partly because of nutrients running into the Great Barrier Reef, then these starfish are predatory and they eat the coral and destroy huge amounts of it. And although it's hard to get the exact scientific figures on this, roughly 40% of all the destruction of the Great Barrier Reef coral has been from these starfish. So we do need to get rid of these starfish. Just as a little footnote to that, our larval bot is a modification of this ranger bot that's been swimming and killing these starfish, and larval bot is reseeding some of the coral reef with coral that has survived some of the recent global warming. And the idea there is we might have more vibrant healthy coral that we could reseed. And so again, it's just more adept and better than human divers. And of course, it doesn't put humans at risk when it does this kind of work. So here's an example, right, where the political economy is kind of small. It's sitting in a university, as I said. Queensland University of Technology is kind of taking the lead on this, the researchers there. And it's doing a lot of good. There's no doubt in my mind about that. Just give you another quick example. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but another one that's kind of impressed me is something called Rainforest Connection. And this is a device. You can see the fellow who worked on this, who came up with this idea, fairly young. And the idea was to use cell phones and convert those into solar-powered listening devices to listen for the sounds of illegal logging in the tropical forests of Latin America and the Asia Pacific, in places like Brazil and Indonesia. This has been used. And this has turned out to be a very effective tool, because they're put up high in the canopy, and it has the capacity to hear the sounds of chainsaws in the far distance, or the rumblings of perhaps trucks or bulldozers. And it can send an automatic alert to rangers that this is a possible sign that illegal logging is occurring. But there's other applications now that we're discovering with the same technology. It's so adept at listening that it's able to hear a jaguar, for example, in the forest. Not actually by hearing the jaguar, it's so stealthy that you can't actually pick it up, but it hears all the other sounds in the forest that then the algorithm says that's the jaguar. And so it's actually helping to map biodiversity now, as well as listen for the sounds of illegal logging. Again, a small political economy. This is a nonprofit organization doing this. And again, it's worthy of applause. There's no question that this kind of AI is doing lots of good, and we want to see it continue to do this kind of good, right? I'll just give one final example. I had to pick one from my own university. Here at the University of British Columbia, where I teach, we have an AI project called ADA, which is a self-learning and self-driving robotic laboratory. And this very cool lab works at 10 times the speed of a team of human researchers. But what's really interesting about this, it's doing research on trying to advance solar technology, is it runs its own experiments, but it's proposing its own hypotheses. So it's learning from all the data that it's collecting, and then it's giving itself its own hypotheses to go out and test. And so this is presumably, hopefully, going to lead to a generation of ideas and hypotheses that no one's ever thought of before, and maybe lead to significant dramatic breakthrough in solar technology. The researchers here at UBC are very ambitious, and they have this vision that they're going to have self-driving robotic laboratories all over the world before long, promoting environmental technology. Will this happen? Is this an exaggeration? I like to think not, because they're my colleagues, but it's possible they're exaggerating a little bit, because it's good for getting grants and good for getting positive feedback. But at the same time, I'm very complimentary of this in the book. I think this kind of research and this kind of breakthrough thinking is really useful and valuable. There's other aspects I talk about in the book that I think are actually doing some good. One of the areas is the value for what I think about as traditional business efforts to improve the efficiency of their operations, particularly the efficiency of their energy use, the efficiency of their supply chains, the efficiency of their overall production system and their retailing system. In past work, I've called this eco-business because one of the things is this is not really about sustainability of the planet, it's really about sustainability of business in a time of increasingly scarce resources, but it's still about pursuing efficiency gains and eco-efficiency. And so it does produce measurable gains in terms of producing more with less. It doesn't necessarily lead to aggregate benefits for everybody because they might produce so much more. There's overall damage, but it definitely is improving efficiency. And you can see that artificial intelligence moving into the supply chains and into the energy systems and into the waste management systems and into the packaging systems, especially into the transportation systems of these companies, that we're actually seeing pretty significant gains. They're financial gains for these companies, of course, but they're kind of measurable gains, at least measured in some ways on an environmental scale. I'll just give one example. The chess program that I talked about, AlphaZero, that I was so impressed by, that DeepMind, this was a UK company, did this breakthrough research on chess. The program that they used to create this chess engine, after Google bought DeepMind, they took that program and they modified it to automate Google's cooling systems of its data centers. And data centers are a huge drain on the world's energy right now, and it's rising very quickly because we're Zooming and having, you know, discussions like this one, and so we're drawing down energy as we all listen to me. But one of the things is artificial intelligence, and particularly this kind of deep learning, neural network-based artificial intelligence, is just very adept at learning from data, and it gets better over time. And so when they put it in to automate the cooling system, they were able to reduce the total amount of energy use for the cooling systems by more than 30%, and it's continuing to rise. And they're just better at, AI is just better at managing those cooling systems than teams of humans. Were partly they're faster, the same way with, you know, trading stocks, but they're partly tinkering all the time, right? And so they can get the marginal efficiencies. So we're seeing, you know, lots of prospects there. We're also seeing a whole other long list of prospects as well, right? Many of you will be very familiar with this. I won't go into great detail. I do talk in the book about it, but we're seeing a whole host of energy savings for consumers as well, right? Smart products, we have smart homes. We're getting smart electrical grids where AI is helping to manage electrical grids. Just as a side note, particularly valuable sometimes for solar and wind, because solar and wind can be intermittent in terms of an energy source and there's storage issues. And AI is very good at predicting weather, as I mentioned, the new AI. And so it's just much better at figuring out when supply will be available. It's better at predicting when demand will be rising. And so, you know, solar powered grids and wind powered grids are simply being improved with artificial intelligence. So again, right, another example where we can celebrate this technology. Smart cities is another example. Probably one of the biggest areas where we're seeing just a dramatic uptake of artificial intelligence is smart agriculture, right? And, you know, just to give one of 100,000 possible examples I could give you, we're using artificial intelligence to be more precise with the application of fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, and we can pinpoint the amount and just be much more precise with artificial intelligence than was possible when spraying was done without that assistance. I should say, because I'm going to be a little critical of some of the industrial agricultural applications, there's also some apps that are actually helpful for local farmers in developing countries. Just one example, again, among many possibles. There's so many applications out there, is Plantix. This is an app that allows farmers to take a picture of a diseased plant, and then they get that identified what the disease is and a recommendation about how to treat the disease, right? And so it can help local farmers tackle disease early in their crops. And so this is, again, an application that has lots of potential value for a lot of people in the world trying to survive. Now, that was kind of coverage of what the optimism side of the book. Lots of good news going on there. But as I mentioned, the political economy analysis, the minute you talk about this as power, is the minute you think about this strategically as something that really is competition among the world's biggest companies and the most powerful states, you start to see lots of red flags coming up all over the place. One red flag, just very quickly, is, of course, many of these things that I just said was celebratory and was valuable. It's part of the same technocratic management that's got us into a pretty serious, in my opinion, escalating global environmental crisis, where across the board we're seeing, not nearly enough progress on things like climate change, tackling tropical deforestation, the extraordinary pollution of the oceans, the depletion of fish stocks, soil erosion. I could go on and on. And this says, we're going to solve this by yet another technological fix. And I think there's a techno-optimism there that a lot of people point out. And one of them is, we're going to double down on industrial agriculture when industrial agriculture is bringing a lot of problems with it. And so one of the things with AI is they tend to go in the big, you could see the picture, right? The big tractors, and they're expensive tractors, and it leaves the farmers indebted, and it leaves them now not just dependent on renting large tractors, and they also then need the software, and they can't fix it, and dependency rises, indebtedness rises. You can see all of it. So there's you got to accept that this is a technology that fits right into, we can fix things with technology, right? There's, of course, many of you will be very familiar with this. I'll let this be in more of the Q&A because I want to make sure I have lots of time for that. But there's lots of issues around personal data privacy, particularly in countries that aren't protecting data in the same way as is happening in places like Europe, Australia, North America. But there's also a lot of personal exposure to surveillance going on. I'll talk about that a little bit in a moment. There's also lots of problems with the technology that I've been kind of skating over. And there's, for example, significant bias. There's racial bias in a lot of the technologies in terms of what's recommended, in terms of, with, let's say, facial recognition technology, who it's able to identify, when it misidentifies people, right? There's lots of problems because, again, when something's learning from data, it matters the quality of the data that goes in. And if the data's quality is low, it's not going to have good, fair, unbiased recommendations or conclusions, right? Another big issue is, again, I am a great enthusiast of AlphaZero and this chess program that I see as creative and intuitive. I should have said that back. I actually think that the new chess has actually developed intuition, which is extraordinary, but it doesn't have very high transparency and explainability, because we often don't have any idea why a program that's learned from trillions of data points, we don't actually fully understand why it's making its decisions and how it's making its decisions. So this has big consequences, not such big consequences if you're playing a game of chess, but really big consequences if the artificial intelligence, for example, is making a recommendation of whether you admit somebody or not as an asylum seeker, or you decide whether or not they should get parole, as some people are using this kind, or whether they are prone to criminality, which some people are using AI for, right? So there's lots of issues inside this technology. And of course, with that comes lots of other big concerns that people have been raising in books that aren't talking about so much sustainability, but the world economy, right? We're looking at big unemployment for a lot of people who are in what you might think about as jobs where it takes intelligence, but it's a lot of repetitive intelligence, right? And so, with that's going to come inequality and potentially injustice. And alongside that, this technology, and this is what I've been writing on more recently, also is playing a role in promoting authoritarianism and what I see as kind of a post-truth politics. Increasingly, some of the nastier states out there are using this technology to supercharge disinformation. But a lot of authoritarian states around the world are also turning this technology to ramp up surveillance of people's activity on the internet, but more specifically to use this to put facial recognition technology in place to be able to track and monitor people. And this technology is becoming very, very quickly precise and accurate, to the point where countries like India now are hoping to eventually put 1.4 billion people into their data bank so they can identify everybody. China is moving in that direction. Singapore is moving in that direction. So there's lots of countries that are now going to try and use this artificial intelligence to actually completely and fully be able to identify, monitor, and track where people are at any given time. So a big potential danger. Another big potential danger here is what I see as a broader trend in international relations, which is the rising power of big business, and particularly the increasing concentration of power in a few big businesses. So you get people like Jeff Bezos of Amazon, worth almost 200 billion US dollars, right? Just stunning amounts of money. But also Amazon itself and Microsoft and Facebook and these big technology companies. But also this is concentrating power in back into the big oil companies and into the big manufacturing companies, because they're of course cooperating and now using this technology. And alongside this, I see this as potentially empowering militarized states, because this is a very powerful technology potentially for the military, and particularly for the capacity to create autonomous weapons, or what some people call killer robots, driverless tanks, driverless submarines, drones, but most frightening, the capacity to actually have AI do the fighting for us, right? And there's a lot of activists trying to stop this. There's a lot of people opposing this, but there's a lot of people inside these military industrial complexes that want to see this happen. And so, like I said at the beginning, there's a lot going on here. With this, we also see with the flip side of all the good things that AI is doing to protect biodiversity, to help us do better climate modeling, to help us protect the Great Barrier Reef, this same technology can also help with extraction, right? It's also very, very good at figuring out ways to get more minerals out of the ground, find more oil, to get it out cheaper, right? So the oil companies and the mining companies are both investing enormously. The same with the retailers. So it's also very, very good at ramping up consumerism. It's very good at advertising. And so one of the things that I talk about in the book is this is a powerful technology for micro advertising and for convincing people to consume more. And for those of you who know my work, I've been deeply concerned about what I see as this rising wasteful consumption and overconsumption among the wealthy of the world. And so this is a very powerful technology for getting that wealthy part of the world to buy even more stuff. And it goes on, because there's other dangers too. There's of course a danger that comes with just building this technology. We need more minerals, coltan, cobalt, rare earth elements, particularly for the products, right? The smart refrigerators, the smart stoves, the smart, the smart automobiles, right? And with that becomes, we need to replace all of this, these old appliances with these smart appliances, these old homes with the smart homes, these old automobiles with the self-driving automobiles, right? And so we already have an e-waste crisis, as most of you will know, and you all know that only about 1/5 of it is even recycled now safely. And we're going to have a whole lot more e-waste coming as we decide to grab that $16 trillion that PricewaterhouseCoopers sees coming into the world economy. And of course, with all this extra consuming and all this extra goods, we're going to have, just more waste. We're going to have more pressure on the global environment as a whole. And I'll just give one example, because I've never seen it actually talked about in the celebration of the self-driving car. And don't get me wrong, I think the self-driving car has extraordinary potential, for example, to reduce dramatically, I would say, the number of deaths. It's at about 1.3 million a year die in automobile accidents. So I can see that going way down as we transition to a world of self-driving cars. But we also have to think, what environmental costs might that come? So just give plastic as one example, right? you know, this is a figure that always kind of shakes my head. The last 15 years, we've produced more plastic than all of history before this time. We have an avalanche of plastic in the world right now. And you can see, where is it going? Well, a lot to landfill, but our recycling systems have fallen apart, as everyone will know, and China's not taking the world's plastic anymore, and a ton of it's just pouring into the ocean right now. And we're looking at the amount of plastic pouring into the ocean doubling from 2010 to 2025. And what's interesting here is a lot of people then might not know, probably you all know those two figures, is that automobile tires or synthetic rubber accounts for about 5 to 10% of all that marine plastic pollution. And so you have to think, okay, so we're going to have a whole new set of cars and a whole new set of automobiles and a whole new set of tires. And so with, you know, supercharging the older technologies with artificial intelligence, we're going to bring, you know, these older environmental pressures, and we're going to increase those environmental pressures. So that gives you a sense of the book, right? Lots of, I think, things to celebrate, but lots of things to get worried about. And so the kind of overall conclusion that I take away from this is that for me, artificial intelligence is something that if you care about global sustainability and you care about global environmental change, we have to pay attention to it. This is not a technology that we should take lightly. It is going to change the world economy, and it's going to change politics, and the pace is incredibly fast. I can barely keep on top of this technology, and it's accelerating. That's what I think anyway. I think that we're seeing kind of an accelerating competition, but also an accelerating set of applications for this technology. And for that reason, it's very hard to generalize. I tried to kind of generalize, you know, what patterns would happen. It's kind of all over the map, just the same way electricity would be if you tried to say what's the good and the bad of electricity. But I would argue that it is doing two big things. It's empowering big business and kind of transnational corporations and their control they have over the world, over world politics right now. And I also, if you have concerns about capitalism, would say it's supercharging capitalism. It's fueling capitalism. And I have an article in the international the Review of International Political Economy, sorry, RIPE, which makes this argument. For those of you interested in looking at that, that article came out a couple of weeks ago, where I talk about just the ways that this technology is actually an accelerator technology of capitalism as a whole. And unless we address that, we're not going to really get at the full impacts of this technology. And, you know, with that in the book, I say, that said, we can't wish away artificial intelligence. And I always kind of shake my head when I hear people say that. There's way too much, just way too many interests have been unleashed. There's powerful states, there's powerful companies. We're not putting this back in the box. This technology is out there and it's changing the world. There's no question. But I also say we wouldn't want to put it back in the box. Would we want to put away, you know, a semi-autonomous submersible that's helping to save the Great Barrier Reef? I mean, I just don't think we would, right? And I think we have to differentiate between technologies, artificial intelligence technologies that are doing harm and artificial intelligence technologies that are doing good. And so I do think there's real value to this. But the key thing for me is we have to recognize the limits. And even when we're saying we're going to save the Great Barrier Reef using a semi-autonomous submersible, I think we need to tone that down a little bit, because we also need to change the agricultural system that's driving the pollutants into the Pacific, that's leading to outbreaks of crown of thorns starfish, that's leading to the problem that you then have to have a technological semi-autonomous robot go out and kill the starfish, right? And so we have to also think, okay, it's a Band-Aid. We also need to step back and think we have to get at the root causes. And I do think there's ways to minimize the risks and dangers. And I'm happy to talk about that in the Q&A, and I've got lots to say about that with something like facial recognition technology, which I'm working on now, which I see as one of the biggest, most threatening of the AI technologies. But I do think there's ways to still do good with it, with even facial recognition technology, but we need to keep it tight controls around it. And then finally, I do think it's important for activists, and I always, and I kind of conclude the book with this, environmental activists in particular, I think need a little bit of a wake-up call. I don't see a lot of environmental groups like Greenpeace or the Worldwide Fund for Nature, or even some of the local NGOs, I actually think they need to start challenging artificial intelligence. I see lots of human rights groups doing it. I see lots of privacy groups, lots of civil liberty groups are fighting this technology, the downsides of it. But environmental groups just seem kind of caught in thinking it's pretty good. But I would say no, they need to push back, because this is empowering big business and militarized states, and they're potentially, need the environmentalists to join the human rights activists, the privacy rights, the civil liberties groups as well. So that's a flavor of the book. I managed to do that in a little longer than I thought. Sorry about that. It's hard to cover an entire book, but thank you all very much for listening, and I look forward to all of your questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Dauvergne, for that really interesting presentation, and I'm sure we're all going to go out and buy a book now. That was just a taste, so thank you. We really appreciate that. We'll move on to the question and answer session now. I haven't received any questions through the chat, so feel free to indicate if you have a question, or otherwise I'm just happy for you to speak up and talk to Peter directly.
You know, I might kickstart with just a question to get my thinking just going. I was taken aback a little bit by your comments about low transparency and explainability. I hadn't even thought of that as an issue, because I think it's definitely significant in terms of, I guess, helping us learn. So one of the things that I think emerged from your talk that I liked in terms of the positive aspects of the contributions AI can make is we can learn from what the AI can do for us in terms of systematizing, I think, creativity, intuition. So I guess the question I had was, to what extent is this transparency a problem? Like, the people who design these things, can you effectively manage that so that it is something that we can then learn from the AI, so that there's a, I guess, relationship emerging? Just a quick question, I guess, to get going. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you, Afshan. That's an excellent question. There's no question that that's at the heart of a lot of people's thinking about how we can potentially reduce some of the risks of this technology. So what sometimes people call old-fashioned AI, or AI that was there's still this form of AI that is it's made by programming, and so the engineers and computer scientists that make it, they basically give it the rules, and so they understand fully the algorithm that is actually making the recommendation or the decision or the prediction, or performing the function, right? Which or choosing a move in a chess game, right? The issue is this deep learning revolution that we're now in the midst of is basically a revolutionary shift in the way a lot of AI is being developed, which is relying on this huge trove of big data that we have in the world, and basically and the dramatic increase in computing power, and the advances in algorithms, and saying to the or setting it up so that the artificial intelligence basically teaches itself. I'm using non-computer science language here, but it actually goes out there and it learns. It's self-taught, and it does that by going into the data and learning from that data, maybe producing more data, maybe finding more data, and then continuing to learn over time from that data as the data either improves or gets better. So there's a couple big issues that come with that. One, if the data is poor, you could get what I said jokingly, garbage in, garbage out, right? You have garbage data going in, you're going to get garbage recommendations, garbage chatbots, Maybe racist chatbots. I have a story in the book about a racist chatbot. You know, these things, these can happen. But a bigger challenge in some ways is this issue about transparency and explainability, because when the AI learns from massive amounts of data, it isn't obvious to anyone exactly how it is making its decisions, its predictions, and its recommendations. So that's tough. So a lot of lawyers, actually, some of the leading people on this are law professors around the world, are actually deeply worried about this, because not being able to say to somebody why you were actually denied, let's say, a visa, or denied entry to a country, or you were given denied parole, or you were given a 5 years prison sentence instead of a 2-year prison sentence. That's a real tough challenge, right? Because you want to be able to say, oh, well, the reason is these are the, but you don't. It's the AI has just said, well, the data suggests that person X is likely to reoffend. That's and the kind of scary thing, Afshin, is that this new AI is often right. It's very powerful. It's actually, this is why everyone's so attracted to it, is because it's actually often much better. And so one of the things that was very interesting about AlphaZero to me is, of course, somebody came up with a clever idea. Let's give AlphaZero some human knowledge too, because humans have learned so much about this game. It just made it worse, right? So you can see the conundrum we're in, right? We've got an AI that's becoming better at what it does, more powerful in terms of generating financial worth, and more powerful in terms of its political importance, but it's in a black box that it's very hard to open up. So one of the big challenges for computer scientists, and this is beyond my expertise, but maybe somebody here is knowledgeable, is people are working very hard on trying to figure out a way to then go back in and figure out how these AIs are actually coming to their conclusions. Because if they could do that, then regulators and lawyers would be much more comfortable automating, right?
Fantastic. Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, it's a very interesting area.
Mm.
Thank you, Afshin and Pete. We've got quite a few questions coming through the chat now. And for those who have put questions there, I do apologize if we don't have time to get through them all. I'm also not sure whether people want me to reveal their names or not, so I just won't to be safe. The first question is, and I quote, 10 years ago, I would have been optimistic about the ethical controls on AI, but given current behavior, not least from our side, what would you see as a mitigation?
Can you just repeat the middle part of that? You got cut out, just Alex, right in the middle. Sorry.
Sorry, I'll repeat the whole question.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I just got cut off.
10 years ago, I would have been optimistic about the ethical controls on AI, but given current behavior, not least from our side, what would you see as a mitigation?
Our side. I'm sorry. I'm not.
Yeah, I don't know
okay.
what that means either.
Okay, that was the part I wasn't completely sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, I could say that. I could speak to that. So I agree. I actually have some concerns about how difficult this is going to be. For the international community, because one of the things is, because of the nature of this technology being a general purpose technology and not really being this AI that's, you know, like in the science fiction, but it's basically diffusing everywhere. It creates an extraordinarily difficult governance challenge for the world, right? And one of the solutions that you hear that's becoming increasingly common, the EU's talking about it, but big companies in particular, ones like Microsoft, go in this direction, is to put in place ethical guidelines to control the use and dissemination of this technology. And one of the problems with that is it's a very weak form of governance, and it tends to constrain in only the lightest way. And in some ways, it reinforces the trend towards self-governance of these big corporations already. But on top of that, where we're seeing some of the fastest uptake of artificial intelligence is in China. And China has set itself a goal of strategic leadership in AI by 2030, and has also gone strategically into exporting AI, particularly AI surveillance technologies throughout the developing world, particularly the Belt and Road countries that they're trading with and developing economic relations with. And so you can see, ethical guidelines in those settings are not going to take us very far. So maybe Facebook and Microsoft and Google and Apple, modify. Even Amazon is putting in ethical guidelines, some of their behaviors, but it's unlikely you're going to see, where the biggest energy in this technology is going to move. Now, in terms of regulation, the better news on regulation is we do see at the national and local levels some patchy regulation around AI that's much stronger than in other jurisdictions. Just give you one example. We see cities like San Francisco, Boston, Oakland, I think Cambridge, Massachusetts, Berkeley in California. They have all now banned facial recognition technology for use by public officials. And they have just basically taken control of that, saying this technology is too dangerous and we don't want it to get into our societal structures, because once it's in there, we're not going to be able to unravel it in the future. And so there's some movement in the European Union towards tougher regulations, et cetera. So yeah, it's probably looking like, some places will put some controls. I'd be curious what Australia is doing. I haven't managed to follow it closely enough. If anybody in the chat is familiar with the regulatory system in Australia, my sense is it's pretty light as well. Like, no cities have banned things like facial recognition technology, right? That's what I thought. Yeah, I don't think so. So yeah, ethics will take us. I'm back to your question. I'm not super optimistic.
All right, thank you.
Despite liking some of the technologies that do arise, right? Like the.
Okay, the next question is asking, do you have any thoughts on the effective altruism movement's focus on artificial intelligence as an existential risk? Is this more exaggeration, or is there some credibility to it?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and I'll probably say something a little bit controversial back to that. I am not of the view, but I also would accept that I could well be wrong, because this is a tough roll of the dice. But I don't see artificial intelligence as an existential threat. And I don't really think Stephen Hawking, who kind of raised that, and Elon Musk has kind of thrown that out despite using it in his Teslas anyway, and also in SpaceX. And anyway, he's also talked about it being an existential threat. And I kind of get the logic idea, which is that if you get a AI that has super intelligence and it's smarter than the most intelligent human on the planet, well, then it's obviously going to be able to program itself to become even more intelligent, and then it's going to become so dramatically intelligent that it won't need humans anymore. But I actually think that that's quite far in the future, and that what we're dealing with right now is actually a much bigger political force, which is general purpose diffusion AI, running through all other technology of the world, right? There's almost not a technology out there that isn't now experimenting with AI as something that might, make it more saleable or more powerful or more effective. And so I would see it not as an existential threat, but I would see it as a dramatic political challenge, governance challenge for the world, as we kind of supercharge the global economy in the midst of what I also see, which I didn't talk much about, is this escalating global environmental crisis, right? I actually think we're in a deeply embedded, accelerating environmental crisis in the world right now. And so to supercharge capitalism right at that point in time, that could pose an existential threat, but not the way science fiction writers and many people like Stephen Hawking have thought about. I hope I answered that question. People should feel free to jump in and use the mics too, if I'm not fully answering.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question. I think this may be linked to the first question actually, but I'll leave that to you to address, Peter. What are the expectations for new public policies to minimise the risks, privacy, and others linked to the application of innovative new AI technologies in the community?
Yeah, well, that's an excellent question, and what I would throw back to the challenge to the law school, all of you, is I've come very strongly to the belief that this technology needs regulation, and it needs a whole basket of different regulations. That's going to be the real trick, because it's not a singular technology, it's a general purpose technology. It means the controls that we need to put in place to deal with facial recognition technology is different from the controls that we might need, for example, with self-driving cars and the morality of whether a car chooses to save the driver or hit somebody on a bicycle, right? All of these are really tough, different issues, right? But even inside facial recognition technology, I would say facial verification. So using the technology to, let's say, confirm a transaction, your banking, or using it to open your iPhone. I think that's very different from using it for mass surveillance, for example, putting it on cameras and tracking the movement of people, or using it to watch an ethnic minority, as they're doing in some countries, and then anytime somebody of that ethnic background is caught on the facial recognition camera, there's a ping to security officials to alert them, regardless of where they are in the entire country. This kind of mass surveillance is George Orwell 1984 on steroids. It's very, very frightening. And so for me, that's a very different set of issues. Yeah, just one other, because I know Australia is doing this, is then using it in schools is I think a different regulatory issue, and thinking about whether it's worth getting school children used to this technology and seeing the attendance taken, for example, or universities using it to take attendance, or universities using it, as they are in China right now, to monitor people during COVID-19 to see if there's any signs of illness, right? And that's again kind of a different set of issues. Maybe there's some circumstances when we allow it, maybe not. So you could see that this is going to open a regulatory box, which I just see as massive, but governments have to step up. And right now they've kind of been ducking it. They kind of scared to regulate it. They don't know how to start. And so you see most countries are doing nothing, but kind of saying they're going to do something.
All right, thank you, Peter. I'm conscious of the time, and a few people have had to leave to go to other meetings and things. So we might just have one final question, and I think this is a really good question to finish on because it goes to the heart of your project. The question is, I wonder if the professor could shed light on whether it is possible to design a global environmental pattern using state-of-the-art AI criteria to showcase to policymakers and society how precise data can curb ecological damage on a worldwide scale. In other words, how can AI increase the power of international environmental law to help improve environmental stewardship on a planetary scale?
Well, that is a very interesting question. I have never actually thought of that question. Yeah, I do think there's ways that AI can assist. And so, like I said, the way I've kind of tackled this is to try hard to think and imagine ways that this technology actually does good, and then channel it to do that good. So I would say you could think of lots of cases where you could have scenario building, or AI could be part of assisting with deepening the understanding, managing the data, understanding the interconnectedness of all the different laws in the world, and how that might be, you know, counteracting each other, et cetera. And so kind of my time when I'm feeling very optimistic about AI is when it's kind of in partnership with thoughtful human teams, and when it's not kind of off on its own doing its kind of decisions and recommendations, but when it's a tool and it's understood as a tool, and it's understood as a tool with limits, and understood as a tool that might have bias, and understood as a tool that might lack transparency, and we should be careful how much we rely on it, then I could see it doing lots of good. And law is very interesting, because when I did my pitch, I'll put it that way, for the book, this will be interesting for any PhD students who are out there, I had to pitch this book to MIT Press. And so the pitch was, this is the first book to ever bring together a global analysis of AI with a focus on global sustainability. And what was interesting is MIT Press has published about 500 books on global sustainability and about 350 books on AI. And this is the first book to ever bring the two together. So I pitched it to them, and they're like, oh, wow, that's a good point. We really should have the two giant wings of our press, because those are their two specialties, right? Technology but AI has been a subspecialty. Back to the 1960s, they've done AI. So then to document that there'd been almost no social science research on AI that's critical and taking a critical lens, and there'd been virtually no political economy analysis at all of AI, and it was always kind of this apolitical, often kind of, you know, reporters who have a tech background reporting. But in there, you see one group of people who have been at the forefront of understanding AI governance and AI risk and AI dangers, and that's law. And so there's lots of law professors, including in Australia, who have been publishing and writing about artificial intelligence. And there's good reasons for that, because it's already being used and applied and in different legal contexts, and doing some good, but also bringing some risks. And so, so some of the only critical analysis I found was in law journals and by law professors. And so people in law already have kind of an advantage. I can't think of another political scientist working on AI, for example. Hopefully there will be after today. So yes, over to law to save the world.
What a fantastic note to end on. So thank you, Peter, and thank you everyone for coming and participating today. It was a really insightful discussion, and I hope you all benefited from it. And again, in particular, I'd like to thank Professor Peter Dauvergne for contributing his time and expertise for us today. Our next seminar will be presented by Professor Fleur Johns of UNSW Law School on the 22nd of October. And it will be on the digital transformation of humanitarianism and the governance of populations. So that looks like it's going to be a really fascinating seminar, and I hope to see many of you there. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you all very much. I very much appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter.